Shoebridge.
Madam Deputy President, I rise on behalf of the Greens to speak to the Greyhound Racing Prohibition Bill 2016. And you don't have to read much past the explanatory note and the overview of the bill to understand why it is, as a Greens MP, I'm 100% in support of this bill. Because the object of this bill is to close the greyhound racing industry in New South Wales on 1 July 2017. And that, of course, is a matter that the Greens and many in the animal welfare sector have been campaigning for years. I would like to associate myself with the words of my colleague, Dr Maureen Faruqi, and indeed the principled, committed and hard-working way in which she has been making the case to support a ban of the industry. And in fact, I think working productively to achieve this outcome. But of course, I cannot commence my contribution to this matter without acknowledging the work of my former colleague, Dr John Kay. It was a little bit over 2 years ago when John brought into our party room a proposition that the Greens should get behind a private members bill drafted by him to close the greyhound racing industry in New South Wales. And he brought that proposal to the party room, and then he argued his case. And I've got to say, it was actually a difficult matter for us to get our head around, that there was no possible way of reforming the industry, that the animal welfare issues were so systemic, the governance was so poor and complicit in the animal welfare industries. It was difficult to understand that an industry could be at such a low nadir and be doing such appalling things that it actually needed to be shut by legislation. But John made the argument in our party room, and I've got to say, it was a compelling argument based upon the evidence that was to hand at the time. And we got behind him and we recognised the leadership that he was showing. He ultimately put a bill to Parliament less than 2 years ago, a private members bill, the first time a bill was put in this Parliament to shut down the greyhound racing industry. And of course, as in so much of John's work, he showed enormous foresight. And he got to the nub of a problem and he understood the evidence, I think, definitely before myself, and I think before the great majority of members, not just in this House, but in any parliament in this country. But nobody works alone. And indeed, I know that John had a committed team behind him in his staff. And I particularly would want to note the work of Lauren Walden, who worked in his office for years on this issue, a very passionate campaigner. Very, very passionate on animal welfare. She can't be here today, and I know she would like to be. But, you know, every parliamentary office is a team, and I know the other members of his team, Kelly Marks and Catherine Samiak, they work together as a team, a committed team, to bring about the end of greyhound racing in New South Wales. And I am sure that each of those team members are watching this debate, wishing John could be here and be part of this debate, but they all deserve credit for what they did. But it's wrong to suggest this is some achievement of the Greens or even John Kay or his office. We've got to this point because animal activists have been with extreme bravery, have been getting out and collecting the evidence. Extraordinary tenacity, they've been getting out and getting the video evidence, deeply disturbing video evidence of the extent of live baiting and cruelty in the industry. They have been making the case out there in the public minds, and they have been making a compelling case to close the industry. And then I think what really brought it to a head was that February 2015 Four Corners report on live baiting. And when people saw for themselves the cruelty that this industry indulged in on a routine basis, I think that's when finally the social licence in the broader public of New South Wales and Australia was revoked for greyhound racing. But of course, a media report, social media campaigns, they have the place to move government to act. And I do give credit to the Baird government for actually then instituting the Special Commission of Inquiry by His Honour Justice McKay. And look, I think many people who saw McHugh, who saw McHugh's appointment were sceptical. We know he's a punter. That's the fact of the matter, and there was concern that he may well fall in favour of an industry that survives for gambling. That was a concern. But against that was the fact that he was one of the most respected High Court judges, had shown enormous judicial independence, consistent judicial independence in his work, and indeed was probably one of the most respected lawyers available to undertake the task. And what a job he did. And many people have referenced his report. Many people have referenced his report in this, but I think we should read onto the record some of the compelling findings that Justice McHugh made in that report on the Special Commission of Inquiry into Greyhound Racing. And I'd like to start with what he said on wastage, because his findings on wastage really identify what degree of systemic cruelty there is in this industry. He said this, that the normal life expectancy of a greyhound is between 12 and 15 years, and over the last 12 years, 97,783 dogs were whelped in New South Wales. But currently, there are about 6,809 registered greyhounds. A greyhound is eligible to be registered when it's 12 months old. Absent death through misadventure or illness, the average life expectancy of a greyhound indicates that another 90,974 greyhounds should still be alive. Some pups that were whelped in the last 18 months may be within litters, being reared, broken in or in pre-race training and not registered. However, even assuming that none of these juvenile animals, approximately 10,253, has been destroyed, where are the remaining 80,721 greyhounds? What has happened to them? The answer is that some of them will have found homes outside the greyhound racing industry, or been exported interstate or to other countries, or retained by their owners as pets or breeders, as pets or breeders, or died of natural or accidental causes. But the evidence before the Commission indicates that at least 50% of those whelped, and perhaps up to 70% or even more of them, were deliberately killed simply because they never were or no longer were capable of being competitive racing greyhounds. And we are talking between 48,000 and 68,000 dogs. That's his finding based on evidence, findings which I don't think have been effectively refuted by anyone since the delivery of the report. On live baiting, what did Justice McHugh find? Well, he found this. This commission was established following the live baiting scandal that was exposed by the ABC Four Corners program in February 2015. That program showed training tracks where live animals of various kinds were mauled and killed by greyhounds for the purpose of getting the dogs to chase the tin hare in races more keenly. Giving a greyhound a kill has long been regarded by industry participants as a means of improving a greyhound's performance in races. In evidence before the Commission, it was described as a traditional training method. And the report then recounts this. However, a licensed trainer who admitted to engaging in live baiting and assisting others to do it at the training track he owned testified that he thought 10 to 20% of trainers engaged in live baiting. His training track was a popular venue for those who wished to engage in live baiting and educate their dogs. There was evidence that trainers queued up at the weekend to use his track. His knowledge of the practice and the number of trainers involved in live baiting was obviously extensive. What happened at his track can be regarded as a reasonably representative sample of what has gone on in the industry. And then we've heard talk of an industry that could reform, an industry that understands its problems. But in relation to deception by the greyhound industry, just one part of the deception by the greyhound industry and their blindness to the evidence that was put before them, and I note the contribution of the Honourable Trevor Khan about the late line interviews and the clear evidence that was there for the industry to act upon and failed to do so. Not only did they fail to act, Justice McHugh found that they were directly deceptive. And amongst other things, he had this to say. One of the disturbing features of this inquiry was the Commission's discovery that from at least April 2013 until November 2015, Greyhound Racing New South Wales had adopted a policy of deliberately misreporting the extent of injuries suffered by greyhounds at racetracks. Furthermore, Greyhound Racing New South Wales deliberately failed to make available to the public information about deaths of greyhounds at racetracks, both as to fatalities during races and as to dogs that were to be put down by the on-track veterinarian as a result of catastrophic injuries suffered during a race. Deliberate deception by the industry. And we've had a series of vets who are employed by the industry come out and tell what the reality of that is. The routine killing of dogs simply because they're not fast enough or because they have a minor injury, that it's more expensive to fix and treat than it is simply to kill the dog and get a replacement, because that's the way the industry operates. And lastly, from the McHugh report, I'd like to read onto the record what he had to say about social licence. And of course, one of the terms of reference was for Justice McHugh was, does this industry still have a social licence? And he had this to say, amongst other things. The extent of wastage and live baiting suggests that the view of the greyhound as a commercial commodity is also widespread amongst breeders, owners and trainers. Greyhounds Australasia, the peak body of the industry, has said that in the industry, profits have come before welfare. A significant number of owners have exported greyhounds to jurisdictions where animal welfare standards are practically non-existent. Greyhound Racing New South Wales has conceded to the Commission that in the past its strategic planning for the industry has been weighted towards commercial considerations, with animal welfare largely regarded as a hygiene factor. The reality is that the industry has a dark side. The slaughter of many thousands of purpose-bred greyhounds long before they reach their normal life expectancy may be just business for many breeders, owners and trainers, but it is a cruel business. And Justice McHugh concludes, of course, that this is an industry that has largely lost its social licence, a conclusion which the Greens wholly accept. So in this debate, we now see the Labor Party joining up with the Shooters and Fishers Party to support what has been found by Justice McHugh to be a cruel business, a cruel industry with systemic and effectively unregulated animal welfare. And they put a bunch of spurious reasons for why they come forward to say that this industry shouldn't be banned. Give it a chance to reform, they say. Well, it's had that chance for years and failed every one of it. It's shown no intent of reform. You're not being fair. You're not being fair to the greyhound industry, that this industry should be allowed to continue despite the animal cruelty that we've found. And then we've seen, I think, rank opportunism from the Labor Party in their defence of this, trying to make it about a class divide, trying to suggest that this is some attack on the basis of class. And they've got into bed with some of the most unsavoury elements of the greyhound industry to make their case. It wasn't long ago that the Leader of the Opposition, Mr Luke Foley, and Senator Sam Dastyari, you know, that working class hero who worked as a consultant for Hawker Britain.
Point of order, Mr. President. Point of order. Point of order. Did he? Yeah. Point of order. I'd like to remind you of your ruling last night about making substantive attacks on members, particularly members of the other house. And I'd like to draw that attention.
Different house.
Different parliament.
I don't think you could
attack the different country.
No, you don't need to. If it was with regards to Senator Dastyari,
I was referring to Luke Foley.
I didn't say anything about Foley.
all right. Well, look, I've heard what you've said. The member can proceed. He knows what the rulings are. If he breaches it, I'll pull him up.
We know that Mr Foley and Senator Sam and Senator Dastyari held a joint press conference with Tony Gannon. Tony Gannon, a prominent trainer in the industry. They held it at Wentworth Park dog track to whip up opposition. From a Crikey report, to whip up opposition to the proposed ban. And Mr Foley told the media conference, it's great to be here with respected greyhound industry figure Tony Gannon. Well, is he a respected greyhound racing figure? Because we know what Mr Gannon has been saying in the industry. In a taped telephone call after discovering the Four Corners had that footage, that grossly disturbing footage of live baiting, Mr Gannon, who Mr Foley says is a respected industry figure, told the then CEO of Greyhound Racing New South Wales, Mr Brent Hogan, this: I would have bashed the F out of them and took the camera. I mean, if you know they've got the video, surely you would have done something. And further in that conversation, Mr Gannon said this: personally, I don't care about dead rabbits. The issue of money is more my concern to keep the industry going. Rank, appalling, base opportunism from the opposition in opposing what is a hard, a tough, but ultimately a principled act that this parliament should actually be uniting around. And no parliamentarian should be joining with the likes of Mr Gannon and seeking to use him to stop good legislation passing through this parliament. But it's not the first time they did it. Of course, they've got history when it comes to some of these hard decisions. In 2013, the Labor Party joined with the Shooters to oppose the shutting down of the Game Council. despite the systemic failings of the Game Council being identified, despite the gross concerns about the appalling nature of the absence of regulation of dangerous hunting and shooting by the Game Council. And at the time, the rank opportunism of the Labor Party descended to them calling the Game Council a union for hunters, forgetting, of course, it was an entirely taxpayer-funded body that should have never been allowed to have been established by the then Labor Party, as it did earlier this century. And then we have the Honourable the Reverend Fred Nile coming up and opposing this bill. When if you read his political platform, and I accept on a personal level, it's the position of the Honourable Reverend Fred Nile that he opposes gambling. This is a chance to shut down an industry that only lives on the basis of gambling. Only lives on the basis of gambling. And there's a chance to shut down a gambling industry in this state, and the Honourable the Reverend Fred Nile opposes it. Well, I don't think that stands at all. I don't think that stands at all with his so-called position on gambling. I hear the interjection that the Honourable the Reverend Fred Nile wants a parliamentary inquiry. Well, we've had the report of Justice McHugh. We've had the evidence in time after time after time about the failings of this industry. It lives on gambling and animal cruelty, and this parliament is doing the right thing, I hope. We'll get a majority to actually end the industry, effective 1 July next year. It's relatively easy for a Greens MP, on one level, to come up here and speak to oppose and shut down an industry that is founded upon animal cruelty. And indeed, you know, it's almost universally supported amongst our membership and supporters. Taking a position to end an industry like the Greyhound racing that is founded on cruelty. But I do acknowledge that it has taken genuine courage and the expenditure of political capital by a number of members from the government benches to also get behind and support this. And I think credit where credit's due. There has been a principled position taken by the government and I hope the overwhelming majority of government members. It hasn't come at zero political cost, and I think it should be acknowledged in the debate by people who are normally your opponents, that this is a principled position that's been taken, and I do acknowledge that in the debate. But I'd like to finish with saying this. Any industry that depends upon systemic animal cruelty for its day-to-day business is on notice that they can lose their social licence. They can lose their social licence. And when the public is informed about an industry that makes its profits on the suffering of sentient beings, they're on notice that your social licence can, and I hope will be revoked if you don't change. Because animal cruelty, systemic animal cruelty, should have no place in any industry in this state, and that's why I commend this bill to the House.
Mr Deputy President.